Okay, I want to thank you all for joining me today. We're here, we're live, and today we have two special guests. We have good brother Marlon on today's show for a brief moment, and we also have Gabriel. How do you pronounce your last name again?
Piemonte.
Gabriel Piemonte, who's running for Fifth Ward Alderman in Chicago. Now, before we get too deep into the conversation with Gabriel, I want to let Marlon introduce him to you all because Marlon is very well known in Chicago for like the grassroots work that he puts in the city, and Marlon has taken it upon himself to, if I'm not mistaken, obviously manage Gabriel's campaign. So, with the history that you have in Chicago, Marlon, and the reputation that you have and the respect that you have, what was it that made you take on this assignment, we'll say, to manage Gabe's campaign?
That's exactly what it is. It's an assignment. But first of all, thank you for letting us on the show. I've been a fan for a minute. And, this space has a lot of drama, can have a lot of drama in it. But you've managed to maintain a very professional, just really good platform with super content, excellent perspective. So appreciate you letting us on, man.
Thank you.
Yeah. So typically, I've worked on a gang of campaigns over the past 5 or 6 years, and typically you don't have the managers and the staff in the camera trying to, that's just not something you do. But it's something I've never done and never seen done, but this one was a little bit different. Gabe insisted, and I thought it was a good idea as well, to kind of when we get an opportunity to explain my relation to Gabriel, because of my background in politics and my background in the grassroots, to help give his campaign some validity. Because just to be honest, people are concerned that a white guy is coming into Black space, talking about Black issues. And so with my background, I hope to give him some legitimacy. And for those who don't know, my name is Marlon. If you're familiar with the ADOS movement, I'm not associated with that anymore for other reasons, but that started with me in Chicago. If you know Yvette Carnell, she came to Chicago. I flew her to Chicago a few years ago. She stayed in my house for about 3 days, and we actually jumped off the ADOS movement, which the movement is something that she didn't necessarily want to do, but I kind of drug her kicking and screaming to the idea of let's open up chapters and let's get folks on the ground. And so I opened up the first chapter, and then I think California came on board, and the chapter just started popping up across the country. And I started helping a bunch of chapters start up across the country, California as well. So we would kind of work in tandem to start chapters up. And so that's kind of my introduction into, that's where I met Gabe. I met Gabe on that journey. Met him in 2019. He was actually running the same race, which is the ward I live in, the Fifth Ward. And at that time, Gabe was talking about justice for Black folks as well. He was talking about housing justice. He wasn't necessarily saying reparations at that time, but his relation to people like Linda Jennings, myself, Naeem from BTP, folks like that, it began to be, oh, this is what I'm talking about, is reparations. And so in this race in particular, before he even asked me to help, I looked at every candidate. I live in this ward. I live in the Fifth Ward as well. So I looked at every candidate's platform. There were 11 other candidates. Looked at every candidate's platform, all Black. All the candidates are Black. And only one person had anything about Black people on their platform, anything about Black people on their website, and anything about reparations at all on his website, on their platform website. The only candidate that had that was Gabriel Piemonte. So it wasn't Gabe is a cool guy, or I know I have a relationship to Gabe. It was his platform, plain and simple. And that's what got me involved with the campaign. Gabriel reached out to me. He said one of the things he wants to do is start a Freedmen's Bureau in the Fifth Ward. And that was kind of it for me. I said, let's go make it happen. And so again, I'm related to the campaign. I'm trying to impart my reputation onto Gabe based on what I've done in Chicago with the reparations movement, I've written bills in Chicago that have put millions of dollars in Black organizations' pockets. That's fed Black families for years now. So if you're apprehensive about Gabriel as a white person, let my reputation be imparted to Gabe, and understand that I'm not just managing it, I'm co-signing this campaign. And so before I'll jump off and let you do what you do, part of the reason we're on the show is because campaigns, if you don't know, cost money. They cost money. And in a few days, February 28th is election day. Election day is very, very important in the campaign, not only because it's the day most people vote, but it's important for campaigns because you need money to sustain that day. If you don't have money to make it through election day, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult because election day, it's a lot that goes on in the campaign period. But election day is a very, 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 very critical moment for a campaign. And so in this campaign, if reparations or justice for Black Americans is something you agree with, understand this campaign is a precedent-setting campaign. It's bigger than the Fifth Ward. It's bigger than Gabe. And if it's something you agree with and you want to see a Freedmen's Bureau in Chicago, and hopefully after that popping up across the country, go to Gabe's website, gabe45.com, and donate. Help us on election day. GABEFORFIVE.com, and donate what you can. We're really going to need the help on election day. And I'll mute out and let you do your thing.
Yep. I'll just leave you in the background for the moment. So, if you can hang tight throughout the interview or the conversation, I should say, and I'll pop you back up at the very end. Perfect. Now, for those of you who wish to donate to Gabe's campaign, I just left the link in the live chat, and it is also in the description box below. If you would like to donate to Gabe's campaign, the link is once again in the live chat and also in the description box below. Now, Gabe, the first thing that I want to jump into a little bit is your background, right? Because you are from Boston originally. How do you go from Boston, being born and raised in Boston, to moving to the south side of Chicago? And throughout the time of being in the south side of Chicago, you've developed the relationship with the people of the city, particularly of the south side, to the degree that you have now said that, you know what, I want to run for alderman of the Fifth Ward to represent these people. How did you get to that point?
Well, the short version of this story is I graduated. My family's from the north end of Boston. People who know Boston know that it's the Italian section of Boston. I'm Italian American. I went to my undergraduate was in Boston at Suffolk University. I graduated and I got a job in the Midwest. And so I was in Michigan, working at a university, made a bunch of friends. I moved on. I actually moved to a couple other parts of the country. But I would find when I had time off, I kept coming back. All my Midwestern friends kind of gravitated to Chicago, which is what happens in the Midwest. And so I kept traveling back and forth to Chicago. So I ended up, I lived here for a couple years, went back to Boston for some family stuff. And then when it was really, I felt like time in my life to settle down, I settled in Chicago. Now, the south side of Chicago, I moved to the south side because I got a job at a community newspaper. I moved down here. But what made me really decide this was it for me, my community in Boston was a predominantly Italian American community. So you would be in spaces where people were speaking Italian. The culture was Italian. It was a distinct ethnic group, and the way people live in spaces that share lineage is just very different from the way people live in other spaces. And so as a white person, when I would have an experience in a sort of generic white community I would live in, and I would kind of compare it to that experience that I grew up with, it kind of wasn't the same thing. But I had a very similar, and it actually took me a while to understand my feeling of kind of fitting in on the south side. I just felt more comfortable on the south side than I had in other parts of the city I lived in. And it was actually the second Bud Billiken parade I attended, which is, a really big, for folks who don't know it, It's probably the largest Black American parade in the country, therefore the world. It's certainly one of the largest. And I realized that it reminded me, it was like I lived on the South Side for about 3-4 years. That reminded me of the feast, the festas of my childhood, which would be all Italian American and just people living kind of as a community, separate from the rest of the city, and that connection sort of developed like that. So over time, once you kind of know the place that you want to call home, you sink roots into that place. And so, the work that I've done on the South Side of Chicago 20 years ago as part of a group that established the Southside Community Federal Credit Union. That was a black and white kind of coalition of people. Several years later, about 6 years ago, I was part of a similar coalition that raised a bunch of money to restore a church. And before we gave that money over to the church, we set the condition that they would only hire Black crews, Black-owned companies that hired Black folks. And they agreed to that. I will mention that I was the editor of the Hyde Park Herald for 8 years, and that's important because that as a journalist, so I was a journalist before that in community news, you get to know the neighborhoods, and as an editor, you have that kind of bird's eye view of all of the communities that you're that are a part of the neighborhoods that you live in and report on. I'll finally say, in 2019, we were in real crisis, and we'll talk about the reasons for that, I'm sure, as we go on. But I made a list of 5 of my neighbors. I knew we needed somebody to run against the sitting alderman. And so I made a list of 5 of my neighbors, all Black folks, Black Americans, who I thought would be strong representatives, local representatives, aldermen. And I called each one of them and said, if you run, and there were a couple of issues I wanted to make sure we were in agreement of. And so I said, if you run and we can see eye to eye on this stuff around police reform and another thing we'll talk about, I'll raise money for you. I'll, put my reputation behind you, etc. Everyone rejected me, every one of them. And a couple of them said, I'm not going to do it. You have to be crazy to run for alderman, but you should try it. You should consider it. And so I went from having that conversation to starting to talk to people to say, well, do you think this makes sense? And this is a Black majority ward. It's 58% Black. So that was part of the conversation. Does this make sense in that context? And enough people said to me, listen, we've got a lot of people who just would want to, because they know you, they would just want to understand your policies, but they're going to vote based on that, not on, strictly speaking on, whether you're white or Black. So I made the run. We got 25% of the vote, a little over 3,000 people. And now we've come back again with a whole policy platform that is drawn from, illuminated by the federal reparations movement. And I want to right away say, nothing we're doing locally, we're calling reparations. We all agree, we all believe in reparations as a proper noun, and it refers to a federal effort that, none of these local things, for example, what you hear about in Evanston, which is really close to Chicago, in my opinion, that's not reparations. We don't use the language like that, but we do talk about reparative justice. And again, we can get into more detail. I hope that wasn't too long an answer to what was a pretty short question. I'll try to do better. I apologize.
No, that was perfect. That was perfect. Now, I want to get into your roots and your track record in the South Side of Chicago and in the 5th Ward also. I know you've actually done quite a few things from my understanding and from the research that I have done. You do not appear to be a Johnny come lately that just popped up 11 months ago and now you're running for 5th Ward Alderman. Talk a little bit about I believe you created or assisted in creating a community development credit union.
Yes.
That didn't exist at one point, and it led to numerous Black Americans in Chicago being banked who were unbanked. So explain what that is, the Community Development Credit Union, and how you assisted in establishing that in Chicago.
My pleasure. And this is something I'm very proud of. And when I kind of think about benchmarks in my life, things that have changed my life, this is one of them. And so in the early 2000s, there were a group of us who realized that the South Side of Chicago was about to undergo a sea change. And the rest of the country experienced at least a element of this is the 2008 financial crisis. But we saw already that there was going to be a wave of housing crisis, part of it triggered by the teardown of public housing in Chicago. And so community development credit unions are different. Credit unions, first of all, have a whole different regulatory structure than banks. And so for people who don't fully appreciate kind of how banks operate, banks are designed and regulated to not loan to people below a certain threshold. Banks are punished for serving communities that have the demographic of a lot of Black neighborhoods and cities. So it's kind of a structural racism baked in. Community development credit unions, which is a subset of credit unions, actually have the opposite regulatory structure. So there are measures, there are metrics to make sure that people under a certain income threshold have been loaned to, that the range of services provided include variety of products that are specifically beneficial. And this had the effect exactly what you just described. It drew a lot of people in that were previously unbanked. We are providing loans that are $100, $200. We provide used car loans that are like for a couple $1,000s. We have hundreds of used car loans that we've done over the last several years. And for people who understand transit on the south side of Chicago, this is incredibly important because we don't have the public transit system we have. Kind of at the further south you go, the less of it is available. And the bigger the territory is. So for a lot of people, cars are the only way they can manage a kind of a tough economic situation. We did 2.5 years of organizing. We knocked doors. We gave out brochures. We did information sessions. It was a whole campaign. And, we successfully got a charter. With very few exceptions, no elected officials helped us beyond the sort of traditional letter of support, sort of the least that they could do. And we had very little support in the media. There were a couple of, there was a radio station and the newspaper that at the time I was working at did very like hyper-local coverage, but not a lot of support. It was a lesson to me at how absolute the curtain is when you talk about something that's going to benefit Black Americans specifically and how everybody sort of backs off. And it's a very quiet thing. All you have to do is withdraw support. For example, we applied for empowerment zone money for people who are as old as I am. You'll remember this was like, there have been several iterations of these federal programs that are supposed to help underserved communities. In that round, which was the final round of money that was given out for that program, we did not get any money, but a car wash in another neighborhood did. Literally a for-profit car wash got a grant from the federal government, but something that was going to provide financial assistance on the cusp of a crisis to Black neighborhoods wasn't deemed worthy of support. So
now, also what I want to get into, because we've established, the credit union that you helped to form on the south side of Chicago. You made mention of it earlier, but I would like for you to explain it in a little bit more detail now, because I think this is very important and really critical of what is needed, in the south side of Chicago, especially, throughout cities all across America, is that, if I'm not mistaken, there was a church that burned down or was just somewhat dilapidated, if I'm not mistaken. And you and your partners were able to raise, or I should say your companions or something like that, right? You were able to raise a couple of $1,000s. I'm not exact on, I don't remember what the exact amount is, but obviously you'll fill us in on that. And when you gave that money to the pastor of the church, you gave it to him on one condition. And the condition was, you have to hire Black contractors to fix your church. Can you please speak on that for a moment? And before you do that, also as well, for those of you who wish to donate to Gabe's campaign, the link is in the live chat below, and it is also in the description box as well. If you wish to donate to Gabe's campaign, if you like what he's saying, and you want to help him push forward with winning the 5th Ward Alderman seat. But go ahead and let's get into that real quick.
My pleasure. So an important bit of background that I'm sure people have experienced all over the country. All the time, people build in our communities and say, You know, we only were able to hit this very low threshold of black hires or local hires because we couldn't find anybody. And we all know kind of intuitively that that's not true, but it's hard to prove unless you're, you know, a data nerd and you can kind of dig through things. And so there was a fire in our neighborhood in the Woodlawn community. A historic church burned. It actually was landmarked, owned by the Archdiocese of Chicago. So a Catholic church. They were going to tear it down. The first thing we did was organize to fight against that. It's really, you know, Woodlawn is a neighborhood that the city has used systematic demolition as a tool of oppression. So they've taken black owned homes and demolished them and held the land. We have property in Woodlawn that's been held by since the 70s by the city. It's really a kind of a weaponized tool. So to begin with, there was some energy behind fighting any kind of a demolition. So that was the first phase. And then we were able to transfer title to order that was kind of renting the church from the archdiocese. So now we had an owner. Well, now we had to restore it. We were able to raise $650,000 in 7 weeks using a national network, you know, skills in communication and media. It helped that there was a threat of demolition, actually, because that made it feel like a crisis. And if you give some money, then it might save the church. And so that we had $650,000 in our pocket. And we went in, and just as you described, we said that, you know, we're giving this to you, no strings attached, except you have got to hire not just. And so a thing that I learned as a journalist and in, you know, being engaged with community activists and becoming friendly with some of them, I think about Harold Lucas, who just passed this last year, and Chicagoans will remember Harold. And Harold was the first person I heard say black faces in high spaces is how he would say it. But people who don't necessarily mean a benefit for the community if they get a benefit. And so what I learned from that and from folks who would protest at construction sites was you can't just ask for a black contractor because people will find one. And then you will not see a single person on the site who looks like your neighbors. And so we said we want black contractors, but we also want the folks working for those people to be black. And they agreed to that. The organization that we established as part of the fundraising and then which became a nonprofit, we had enough money raised that I could, you know, we had a staffer basically, and she would go with coffee for the guys and visit on a regular basis and then report back. So we got the commitment, they got the money, and we made sure on a regular basis, we made sure we saw who we wanted that to be there was there. And that's how we did it. The University of Chicago is right up the street. They have a multi-billion-dollar endowment. They built a school in our neighborhood, and we made the same demand. And they ended up at 7% black hires. And they said the number of local hires they had was so low, they didn't have a statistic for it. And they said, it's because you just can't do it. They were building a church. That's a basic construction job. We were restoring a landmark property, and we could get specialists that were all black. This is the lie everyone tells. It's like there's not enough talent or there aren't enough talented people locally. There are all of these tropes that get like just rolled out, like basically saying your neighborhood isn't smart enough, talented enough, or have enough specialist kind of skills to do this kind of work when it's some big construction. And we demonstrated that's a lie. You can do it, and you can do it with people. Now, we were South Side, South Suburbs. We didn't restrict people specifically to that neighborhood. But as alderman, I will tell you, we will do that because you have a lot more juice. This is just, we had some money and it was a one-time, you know, kind of deal that we were making. And so we were a little more strategic. We just wanted to make sure that the site had some folks from the South Side and looked like the kids who would walk by and see, oh, they're doing this restoration. And I'm telling you, some of this stuff was so intricate and complex, and it was fascinating to watch. And you know, I'm proud when I go by that to see that it's standing because of the work we did, and that's how we did it.
Now, you make it a point to make a clear distinction, and you did earlier, but I would like for you to like give a little bit more detail on it, on why you do this. You make a clear distinction between reparations and reparative justice, or local reparative justice. Now, I know you are in support of reparations on a federal level, but you're not too keen of that term being used locally. So give people your reasoning behind making that very clear distinction between reparations and reparative justice or reparative justice?
It's my pleasure, and thank you for asking. And I should say, when I talk about reparations, I these are not my ideas. I've absorbed them. I've gained them through conversation with Dr. Sandy Darity, who, of course, a lot of people who are in the reparations movement will recognize. Friday Jones, Chris Lodson, of course, Marlon, Arthur Ward is another important figure on this south side of Chicago. Linda Jennings, who was mentioned, Cindy McDonald. So there's a whole host of reparationists, Freedmen reparationists, who have schooled me, and I have come to this understanding and this belief and this agreement with what I think is a consensus view among many reparationists, which is reparations. And I describe it in my own words, but the essence, I think, is shared. Reparations is a proper noun. If you look, if I use reparations as a common noun, if I forget to take the trash out in the morning, I can make reparations to my wife by bringing home some dessert. Reparations is just repair for a harm done. And so you can use that very commonly in any way you want. What that does, though, if you take that common usage and treat the very important justice claim that we're talking about like it's the same thing, is you water it down. And the risk is we of course have to recognize we are perpetually under the public eye and in a system that is white supremacist at its very core. And so the fear I have with local reparative programs is that you get to that federal level, and at some point we reach a threshold where someone says, you've got reparations. There's reparations in New Jersey. There's reparations in California. There's reparations in Illinois. You've got all kinds of reparations. Why are you bothering the federal government with this? It's to me, the justice claim is there is a debt that is owed, and no one can pay that debt but the federal government. First, the federal government is the only entity that is responsible on the highest level for chattel slavery. States are responsible in the sense that it was legal, and there is redress is required on every level. But no one, we are talking about a multi-trillion-dollar justice claim. There's not one government, state government, that can do the kind of repair monetarily that is needed. We absolutely need redress. We need redress on the state level, the local level. Private companies need to provide redress. But the two critical elements that we're talking about is, first, only the federal government can repay the debt, the money stolen generationally from people who were not compensated for their labor generation after generation after generation. And the other is we're talking specifically and exclusively in this context about the descendants of enslaved Black American citizens. So other people can have claims against the federal government. Other government entities need to make repair for their role in the enslavement of Black American citizens. But nothing is reparations except the federal redress, the debt repaid that is owed to freedmen, to the descendants of enslaved Black American citizens. And that's how I see the distinction. In the state, it's really precarious, because if a state passes a reparations bill and everybody gets, $8,000 if they jump through the right hoops or whatever, then you really have a claim. Then someone could really say, well, a pretty large government entity has done reparations in Illinois or, wherever, Massachusetts. Why do you, now you're double dipping? You want reparations again. And so we've got to just be so careful. California is the exception. And I just think we have to recognize that what's happening in California is an absolutely unique consequence of a set of circumstances that, as far as we can tell, in no other state will be replicated. In Illinois, for example, we have a reparations commission. A man who has a slaveholder in his ancestry has been seated. And when we told the governor he had done that, because we thought he must have made a mistake, his chief of staff wrote us a letter threatening to sue if we revealed that publicly, and then saying we reserve the right to seat additional people who have slaveholders in their ancestry. It's like Illinois is saying, we'll make this a slaveholder reparations commission if we feel like it. You've got to be careful on the state level. I'm not saying there aren't knuckleheads on the federal level, but we only have so much energy and capacity to focus. If we're all able to really get laser focused on the federal reparations that ought to pass, I feel like there's a chance there. But I think if we've got 50 states that we're putting fires out in, and we've got that, it becomes a really tough situation.
Now, I think here's the most important question. How does this translate into policy in the Fifth Ward? Because, you know, a lot of the things that you're saying, and I don't mean this as a slight, it sounds good. It all sounds great. It appears very on point, but it's one thing to, you know, say all these things, and then it's another thing to put it into policy for the Fifth Ward. So what are the policies that you plan on implementing, giving that you're basing it on a reparations framework?
So this is a terrific question, and I completely agree. I mean, I can be really interesting about reparations and a horrible local representative for Black folks. That's not an unusual thing that happens. This is not that. We're not bringing reparations to the South Side of Chicago, but we are bringing reparative justice and economic justice. And the best illustration, this is true in a myriad of ways, but for the purposes of brevity, the best illustration in Chicago is housing. Housing in Chicago, we can document, we can prove, and there have been studies that have done this on a kind of on a smaller scale. We can prove that there has been deliberate, systematic, organized discrimination against freedmen specifically in terms of housing. We can prove that the city was explicit, not just complicit in it, but that they were active participants. We can prove that specific companies have done this in the past and critically are doing it in the present. What all that translates into is when you can quantify that, you can put a number to it. When you can put a number to it, that's money that needs to be paid out to people who have been harmed. And this can be anything from, I talked about public housing being torn down. That was a dramatic process that involved thousands and thousands of people whose lives, because the process was so sloppy and because laws were broken, damage affecting them personally and the potential of their children, really just even in monetary terms, is substantial and quantifiable. But we also have predatory mortgage lending. And so we have contracts that are people target Black communities and get people to sign on the dotted line. And then it turns out it was a con to get somebody's home. We have steering that specifically Black families that have tried to go into a certain neighborhood are sent into another neighborhood. We have contracts that were written specifically for Black folks that led to a loss of wealth because of the specifics of the contract. So there are a number of practices over, let's say, the last 75 years that have been perpetrated against Black folks, specifically Black Americans, that we can point to and we can say, we need redress for this. In the meantime, that context, facing that history, means what we can do in the present is respond aggressively and proactively against people who are engaged in these kinds of practices, whether it's to renters or to people who own homes. And we can demand that in these cases that we are essentially looking at a class that should be a protected class. We can say there are a group of people who are being discriminated against and it is causing harm today, and therefore we have specific practices we can engage in. That would include, in a very local way, a kind of de facto eviction moratorium. So we would fight for a moratorium citywide, but I would, through that understanding, through that context, I would feel empowered to say, if you as a property owner are not engaging in ethical practices when you rent apartments to freedmen, I feel justified in doing anything I have to do to stop you in your tracks, whether that means, fining you for every small infraction that you engage in, blocking you from any further property development, or even to the point of eminent domain. If you have somebody who shows that they're a chronic abuser, a predator in the community. So that all comes from a reparative frame, recognizing that when harm is done, you confront the fact that harm is done and you demand redress. And there's a process, not to get too deep into it, but there's kind of a 5 elements of reparations on an international scale that includes kind of acknowledging the harm, showing to the satisfaction of the injured party that it will not be repeated and so forth. And so you would want those elements as well. But the key idea is to start to take a proactive local position that says, when you harm Black folks, we're coming after you because of that. And that's not some kind of like, overblown rhetoric, that you're saying we are going to behave as if freedmen are a protected class until they are, because it is justifiable. And we use the federal reparations claim as our foundation and our basis for that position.
Before I forget, because someone just asked a question that I wanted to get to, and I was actually struggling with when to insert this question, but I'll just ask it now, because I think it all actually ties into housing and what's going on with that as well, as it pertains to illegal immigration. Most of us know the negative effects that it has on the Black
Yes.
community. How do you intend on protecting the Fifth Ward against the negative effects on illegal immigration? We all know that in was Governor Abbott, I believe, in Texas, he was shuttling everybody to Chicago, DC, and New York. I know that there's a situation that I'm actually getting ready to report on this Friday and speak on in depth concerning how Mayor Lori Lightfoot has begun the process of housing a multitude of illegal immigrants in a Woodlawn shut down Woodlawn High School. The people of the community didn't want that to happen, and they were able to stall it for a time being, for maybe a month or two, but it happened regardless. So just to make this question plain and simple, as I stated earlier, knowing the negative effects that illegal immigration has on the Black community, which is very well documented and is a proven fact that it does, how do you plan on protecting the Black community of the Fifth Ward from the harms of that?
So the 20th Ward, which is where Wadsworth Elementary School, which is the school you're referring to, is in my neighborhood. So Wadsworth is in Woodlawn, and this is a huge problem. What the mayor here is doing, and what is being done across the country, and the pattern is very clear in my mind. These folks who are coming from other countries, in some cases they're in very serious crisis and they're looking for a shelter and so forth. They're being used strategically against independent Black elected officials. So Jeanette Taylor, who is the alderwoman in the 20th Ward, is an independent voice who has confronted the mayor on a number of issues. She is a Freedmen First alderwoman. And
I'm sorry, what's the name again?
Jeanette Taylor. And Jeanette Taylor, Google Jeanette Taylor. And if you Google Jeanette Taylor and Lori Lightfoot, you're going to probably find a photo pretty quickly of Jeanette. Literally, she's not in the mayor's face. The mayor's in her face, but they're face to face. And the context of that photo is that Jeanette will not back down from the mayor. And when they had a briefing about Wadsworth Elementary School, and they told Jeanette that it had to be top secret. And Jeanette, by the end of the day, had put out on all her social media and in an email to her constituents that they wanted to move this group of immigrants into the school and into the community. Look, first of all, sanctuary cities are a designation that mayors basically, it's very difficult for the city council to kind of overturn sanctuary cities. But neighborhoods, what this is what we want to know. Jeanette wants to know, and I want to know as a resident of Woodlawn, where's the sanctuary from police brutality for Black folks? Where's the sanctuary for low quality education for Black folks? We have homeless veterans in our neighborhood that don't have sanctuary. A woman proposed that same elementary school be used as a center for youth in the community, and the city told her there was no money for that. Yet and still, Wadsworth got $1.5 million to be prepared for sanctuary for these folks who are coming from other countries. I am 100% behind helping everyone we can help. But our campaign is Freedmen First, and that's not just a motto. If you can't help the folks who already live in the community, you can't be spending more money on other people. And that's not prejudice. And it's really, I struggle so much with this because people hear you say, we're gonna focus on Black Americans first, and they say you're prejudiced. What about other people? Why is it not prejudice when somebody says we're going to spend money on these people from Central and South America first, but when you say no, the people who live here need that investment first, that's prejudice. It's backwards. My position is I'm willing to negotiate that kind of a investment for other folks if you can give me some multiple of that for people who live in the community first. So if you say to me, we want to use some underused part of your ward for people who are coming from other countries, then I want to know how much you're going to spend, and I want 3 times that for the neighborhood first before I'm going to say yes. And to me, that's the way you make a strategic deal. Now, I know some people want me to say no immigrants under no condition, we will arm people or whatever. I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say we're going to demand investment in the community before you add something onto it. It has to benefit freedmen first. The problem that we have, our neighborhoods are neighborhoods that things happen to, not for. And the way you change that is by refusing that kind of investment until you see real investment for the community. That's my position. It kind of makes everyone mad because some people want me to say I'm against all illegal immigration, and then other people want me to say I love all people and want everyone to come to the ward and be welcomed. And I do, in the end, I do want everyone to have a safe place. I believe in that in my heart. Look, what all the media is going to show you is my neighbors complaining about Wadsworth, protesting Wadsworth. You know what they're not going to show you? Those same people organizing food, clothing, items for children, doing things for those people who just got here, who they didn't want here. Because that's the part no one wants to understand. Black folks are just saying, you've been screwing us over time and time and time again, and we're tired of it. But once those people came, they've been welcomed. While at the same time, people are talking about, well, it's problematic. That's the real culture of the 5th Ward, the 20th Ward, the South Side of Chicago. And what frustrates me is people want to turn it into a cartoon. They want to turn it into, look how Black people hate immigrants or whatever. That's not it at all. If you believe in sanctuary cities, start with sanctuary for the people who have been beaten, murdered, and sexually assaulted by police officers in this city first. Stop defending that practice and then saying, but let's help these other people out. Stop qualified immunity that protects cops who abuse Black folks, and then say Black people have to be tolerant and let all this stuff happen. It just feels like the idea of sanctuary is used when it's convenient, and not in a way that has to be a universal principle that we shelter, we protect. If I'm not safe, if there's not refuge in the city for me as somebody who served my country, as somebody who lives in the community, as somebody who's a taxpayer, then why are you telling me that there's something wrong with me saying putting other people ahead of me seems unfair? That's my position.
So to be clear, because I remember from what I've read concerning Jeanette Taylor, it appears that she did everything in her power to kind of stop that from happening.
She did,
but in the end, it still occurred, right?
That's
and
the
I mean,
power
and
of the
that
mayor.
happened.
Yeah,
I mean, it happens. Everything isn't 100% across the board.
Right.
You try, and then there's areas where it just doesn't work. But what you're specifically saying, I want to pinpoint what you're specifically saying as it pertains to protecting the Black community of the 5th Ward from the harms and damages that comes from illegal immigration, is that as it pertains to situations that occurred in Woodlawn, that high school, you're saying that what you're going to come to the table with is an attempt at, and correct me if I'm wrong, an attempt at negotiating funds. So where you have Mayor Lori Lightfoot saying, we're going to put, I'm just making up a number, $2 million into refurbishing a worn down Walmart so we can house illegal migrants who were brought here from Texas. You're saying that, okay, before you could even consider doing that, we need 2 to 3 times that for the ward, for our ward here.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Exactly. I want 6 million, and it won't be hard to spend. We have tens of millions of dollars of need. Yeah.
Now, what I would ask concerning that is, how realistic is that, given the powers of an alderman?
It's a good, you're asking a very good question. And so the question is, what if they say no? What can you do? Well, one of the things, it's an unfortunate reality that the one of the challenges that Alderman Taylor faced was that she was alone. So what should have happened is there should have been 5 or 6 other aldermen. If you have a block, if we can lock down the south side, if you don't do business with us, then everything changes. So if we say, look, this isn't, the 3 or 4 neighborhoods that comprise this ward, this is all the neighborhoods that comprise the following 5 wards, and we're just not approving development plans. We're just not going to approve your resolution. Anything you want, if you like it, we hate it until you give us what we need in this ward. Then you would have a change. It is much more challenging to work as an individual. And this is a challenge we face on the south side, that the mayor is very good at peeling off individual aldermen. But I think we need a Freedmen First caucus. We have a Black caucus, and that's terrific. They do a lot of good work. But we need a caucus that literally is organized on the principle of what's in it for Black folks. And if you say, hey, south side alderman, we're going to bring this, $3 million center for immigrants to this neighborhood, we need to say, well, what's in it for Black folk? Like, we need 9 million and it's, again, our neighborhoods, you could spend 9 million and not even notice it. So it's not like we don't have anything to spend the money on, but you need that unified thing. What you can do individually, though, is you can do a good job around communication to get the word out in terms of the harm. So you can really use it to illustrate some of the need in the community. The other important thing that's happening that's also under the radar, we have Latino neighborhoods with closed schools. It doesn't get any more kind of on the nose than this, who have been petitioning the mayor's office to house immigrants. We have people saying, please come to our Latino community with immigrants, and please use this school that you all closed, the last mayor closed, because we sure would like to help these people out. The mayor has refused. And yet, when a Black alderman confronts her and tells the truth in her face and she doesn't like it, all of a sudden she's got money, and that's the place that she's going to put it. And the whole point of this was to disrupt the, and they've kind of, let this drag out, but they announced it at the beginning of the election season. And the point was to throw Jeanette off so that they could put someone in there to run against her who wouldn't have that challenge of dealing with this. I mean, you can't imagine the phone calls that are going into the 20th ward office because of this thing. It's just nonstop. So it's like blowing out your capacity at the very beginning of a re-election campaign, which is when you need twice as much time and resources than you have. They intended it to punish her. And it has been punishing, honestly. And I am absolutely asking people to support me first and foremost, but definitely check out Jeanette's website as well. If you have a little money for Jeanette, this woman is a warrior, and she's been fighting hard for Black folks, and she's been punished for it. And make no mistake, that's how it works. That's how it works in Chicago. You do not get, when you stand up for Black folks, you get put down. That's what happens in Chicago. You get punished for it. And so, everyone, if nothing else, say a prayer for Jeanette tonight. She sure does need it.
Now, I just want to take a quick moment to apologize to those watching. If you see a smirk on my face, I'm human, so it's hard to keep emotions under control when you're seeing certain things being spoken in a live chat. I'm holding in laughter from something that I saw. So I just want to make that clear. I'm not laughing at anything that Gabe said. It was just something that was silly that I thought was cute. So as we carry on with this discussion, there's been a lot of talk, and I've covered this a lot on this channel, concerning illegal immigrant, undocumented. I want to make sure I'm saying this properly. I want to say this properly. Non-citizens, I mean.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of conversation and attempts at bringing to fruition non-citizen voting in local elections. Now, I'm not sure to what degree the role of an alderman plays in that. But what is your position on that, on non-citizen voting in local elections?
I'm against it. I think you're asking a very good question. It's complicated in Chicago. I think that we could make a case. So I think what they would say in the state legislature is that this is their purview. But Chicago actually has a special designation. It's a home rule city. And that means that there are certain kind of fundamental things that we get to make calls about. And for example, public safety is one of them. So we control our police department. I believe that voting is such a fundamental right in a municipality that we should have control over that as well when our views don't agree with those of the state generally. You cannot give non-American citizens the right to vote. I think it's a problem generally, but you sure as heck can't do it in a city as political as Chicago. What I believe Plan A was at Wadsworth, because at first they were going to bring 500 adults in, and specifically adults. The first plan that Alderman Taylor was briefed on was, we're going to bring 500 adults. First of all, it is very, very hard to get a collection of undocumented folks that are only adults. Like you actually have to work like really hard to do that in the hundreds. I believe that they were going to bring them in, and then the next thing you knew, there was going to be a law about non-citizens voting, because 500 is actually a pretty good number to swing a local vote. And anyone who knows American history knows, and I'm talking about my own people when I talk about this, you show up as an immigrant and someone says, we're going to take care of you. You're going to live here. We'll get you a job. We're going to take care of that. And all you have to do is, when we come get you on election day, you're going to vote for who we tell you to vote for. And that's what people do, because that's how the exchange works in America. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but the documentation on this is, there's a lot of it. There's a lot of it. Now, people might argue that times have changed and blah, blah, blah. That's fine. You can say what you want. In Chicago, people are still voting twice and three times. Dead people are still voting. So what I believe is that you're going to get 500 people moved into the ward of somebody who's been your opponent, and then someone's going to run who you like. One way or the other, those people are going to be told there's someone they need to vote for, and that's who they're going to vote for. So I think we're weaponizing the vote when we introduce non-citizen voting, because non-citizens don't have the capacity. Voting is more powerful, more important, more dangerous than driving, but you got to pass a test to drive. Why would you let people vote just because? And I don't even understand how this works in terms of, if anyone, essentially what that is all you have to prove is that you're above a certain age. And so then I want to know, if anyone can vote, how do you control anything? How, all I have to do, I could bring 5,000 people into my neighborhood whenever I want to, and they can vote and leave. It doesn't, even the logistics of it are daunting to me. I'm against it. And I think that as an alderman, I believe even if the state passed it, that we could pass a local ordinance that says non-citizen voting is illegal in the city of Chicago.
You made a statement that I would love for you to give a little bit more kind of detail on. I believe when you were on Be the Power, on Be the Power's YouTube channel. And you said, and I just thought it was really interesting. You said Chicago is America with no pretense. We want Black people right where we can watch them. Latinos can get a little bit of something, but not too much. And the cops are going to beat on everyone who's not white. Can you speak on that a bit? Just kind of elaborate on that position, as far as that statement.
Absolutely. So, I think everywhere in America, these things are true. And when I say that may be a colloquial way to present resource distribution, but There's a study that was published not too long ago by the Chicago Community Trust that shows for every dollar of assets that a white family has, a Latino family has 8 cents, a black family has a penny. So that's literally how it goes. And that's not, and it's worse in other cities like Boston, where I grew up. Um, Police abuse, again, it happens all over the country. Anyone who understands the history of law enforcement in America knows that literally uh, the police departments came out of slave catchers. Those were the organized entities that later, the model that was used in the same way that the system of I was talking about Christopher Columbus earlier in a different conversation, and the system that he used to organize labor in the Caribbean became the plantation system in the South. So there are these very old patterns that have been replicated over time. In Chicago, we don't layer that. It's all real bald and straightforward. People are real bald and straightforward about everything. When we say, how are you doing? We're saying, how are you doing? How do you make your money? So it's like a place where in other places there's sort of a layer, but here everybody's segregated. And so literally it's like we want to see where you are. Mobility is dramatically more difficult on the South Side than it is in other parts and so there are elements, you can find elements of how the Chicago looks in other cities, but this is the city that really is just like, boom, we're giving the nicest locations to white folks. We got black folks in a place that we can control, and Latinos are sort of, they have a little more mobility, a little more resources, not a lot more though, honestly. And I mean, that's just, there is a boatload of data that supports that. And police brutality, I mean, shoot, it's impossible. There's just been, now it's all, we're recording it all the time now. So I just think it's kind of speaks for itself in a way.
You just made an interesting point that made me remember another question that I almost forgot concerning, reserving kind of the best parts of town for white Chicagoans. Currently, if I'm not mistaken, there's construction underway to put up the Obama Center. And it's the Obama Presidential Museum. And if I'm not mistaken, it is in your ward. Can you speak a little bit on the damage and or harm that this Obama Center and Obama Museum has caused in your ward? And how can you remedy that?
This is something I talk about a lot, and it's one of the things that really has kind of made me distinct from other candidates running, because people are nervous about speaking critically of the first black president of Barack Obama and the first lady, who of course was a South Sider. But it's a disaster. It's a disaster for our communities, and it's a disaster on level, starting with the fact that they took 19 acres of park from the South Side of Chicago. For a lot of us, the only yard we have is parks. And so the biggest park on the South Side is now significantly diminished, because, I mean, you think about just what is an acre? Acres are such large tracts of land that we don't talk about urban land usually in acres. We talk about them in other quantities. So it's a huge amount of real estate they've taken. The other thing that's happened is, because of the way it happened, and because there's not feedback from the community, but there is a lot of sort of, how do I describe it? There's a lot of parallel development organizing happening. So like a community development corporation was formed by Arnie Duncan and Rahm Emanuel and a bunch of local pastors. There's been a lot of kind of local speculation that's not being regulated. So the aggregate effect of the center being built, all the hype around it, and a bunch of other stuff that kind of Obama adjacent people are moves that they're making, has been to create a dramatically unstable housing market. And what is being done in that unstable, when a housing market is unstable, when the data kind of makes it impossible to understand what normal is anymore, predators are able to move in and do things that under other circumstances they can't, such as There's a condominium development down the street from me that was built, and a condominium was put on the market for $700,000. A condominium in Woodlawn, it wouldn't be unusual for a condominium to sell for $100,000 in the neighborhood, or $125,000 7 or 8 years ago. This $700,000 condominium was sold overnight. It moved as quick. It was an engineered sale. But the effect of the engineered sale was to create a buzz. And so then you had more people building and putting things on the market at this rate that kind of goosed the statistics. So it looked like, hot housing market. And then you start to get the business trades and the real estate trades talking about Woodlawn is heating up. And then what has happened is people are coming in and speculating on the property. So they're buying it not with the purpose of even necessarily housing people, but with the purpose of seeing what the market will do and how they can manipulate the market. So we now have, for example, I just was in meetings a couple of Mondays ago with these folks that a real estate company bought a group of courtyard buildings. So these buildings with large numbers of apartments in them. They bought 7 or 8 of these, and they're essentially forcing people out by not maintaining services. This particular building has had no heat since Christmas.
Oh, wow.
They just stopped removing the garbage from the dumpsters in the back, so they're like overflowing. They're just waiting for people to leave, and it's eviction through neglect, and that's being allowed because there's an idea that the market should just be allowed to play out the way the Obama Center is sort of affecting things, because there's a vision of gentrification. We're talking about a neoliberal vision where the right people end up in the right places, and the right people, you can be black, but you just have to have $1 million in the bank. It's a different kind of racism that incorporates class as well. And a lot of folks are going to get hurt in the meantime. What an alderman can do is stop. All of the real estate stuff is in the purview of aldermen. Chicago is a unique city in that corruption is knit so deep into the regulatory process that you can't change the sign on your store without coming to me and asking. If you're disabled and you want a sign in front of your house so you can have a space that other people can't park in that says you're disabled, you got to come to me. So the alderman, every opportunity for an alderman to get a buck out of somebody is written into law. That's kind of a horrible, corrupt system, but it also provides opportunity to stop people in their tracks when they're trying to do something. Right now, we have a pretty much hands-off alderman. She's announced she's not running again. So when building inspectors get called to the 5th Ward, they don't show up because there's no consequence. Because the way the system is set up, you're supposed to then get the phone call from the alderman's office. That's how you know that you need to do your job. And that's how they kind of prioritize which places they take care of. In the white wards, they always get the phone call from the alderman, because they know if they don't, they're going to face hell, because they've got people who have resources that they can say, I've got all day. If you're not going to take care of this problem house across the street, I'm going to take the day off because I own the company anyway, and I'm going to get on you until you get this done right. Where, a similar scenario on the South Side could be that you're working a couple jobs, or you've got a bunch of other responsibilities that you're taking care of. So you can't be on top of that. And you can, by contrast, get an alderman who says, they're going to do the least, which is what we're dealing with right now. What the alderman can do is let the Obama Center and real estate speculators know that the party's over, and that there will be consequences to speculating in the communities, and it will stop immediately, just like that. Look, though, I promise you that the guy that I went to, the priest that I went to and said, I have good news for you, I have $650,000, was not expecting the but after that. But the thing is, people play ball once they know that you're not playing and you've got something they want. And aldermen have all future real estate in their hands, all future real estate deals, because there's a kind of tradition, aldermanic privilege in city council, that if I don't want something done in my ward, nobody else votes for it in the council. Everyone plays that way. So if you don't want something done in your ward, everyone is going to say that it doesn't get done. That means if I say, you're blacklisted basically from building in my ward, that's the end of the show for you in my ward. Now you could go somewhere else. And honestly, I want you to, if you're a speculator anyway, but one way or the other, we're going to do things the right way. in the Fifth Ward, and that's how that'll be different.
Now, another question I have for you, and I think you might have somewhat answered it, but I'll ask this just for a little more clarity. From what I remember hearing from you, is that the city of Chicago owns 169 properties uh,
Yes.
that are located in the Fifth Ward, right? And those properties were taken through essentially anti-black racist tactics. How do you plan on getting that property back into the hands of the black community within the Fifth Ward?
So we've identified 70 of those lots. We've got an inventory from the city, 169. Um, we think that number may not be exactly right because they may have missed some, and there are some that literally are mismapped. So there's some adjustment that has to happen. But we know for sure there are at least 70 that are not reserved for anything. That aren't. There are some odd parcels like the city owns a practice area for the fire department that's included in the inventory. We've identified 70. The city is always having these programs that are like you can get an adjacent lot to your house for $1, or you can get a lot on your block if you fill out a form. But there are always layers that kind of exclude people who are just, someone who lives in the neighborhood from getting that. And, you have to hire a lawyer, you have to fill out paperwork. There are often bureaucratic problems. The first approach we want to take is to go to the Department of Planning and say, here's a list of PINs, property identification numbers, and we want you to reserve these for us. We're going to distribute these. We have plans for this. And our hope is that it'll, we'll kind of be able to proceed from there. If not, we're going to essentially design a program like the, buy an adjacent lot for $1 program that will be just for people who have lived for a long time in the community. And we're going to take on the burden of whatever the bureaucratic process is. But we are going to privilege people who can establish their identity as freedmen. And the reason we're doing that is that we want to drive interest in the federal reparations claim and the Freedmen's Bureau we're going to establish. So we want people to go to the Freedmen's Bureau, where we will for free be providing genealogical research. And this is the way to incentivize that. And so we won't distribute until we have a robust number of people who have been able to go through that process. And then we'll be giving it to them because the city has said, okay, do what you want with this, set of properties. Or they'll say, you can't do that, but you can have this local program. And we'll just fill out that paperwork for folks, and we'll get it through that way.
I'm glad you made mention of the Freedmen's Bureau, because I've heard you make reference to that in other conversations that you've had on different platforms. What does that mean? What does it mean to establish a Freedmen's Bureau in the Fifth Ward? What is that exactly? And just what would it do? And are you even going to be able to establish a Freedmen's Bureau?
So we've talked, Marlon and I and other folks that we've mentioned earlier have what this would look like. And what we're essentially describing is an advocacy institution for Black Americans that would would be a focal point for lobbying the federal government as, part of the national reparations movement. It would, as I just mentioned, do genealogical research, but it would also advocate independent of my office for Black folks, and it would put the interests of Black folks first. It would also provide education and other kind of similar resources. This is a freestanding, probably 501c4, although those final decisions haven't been made yet, body that will be Freedmen owned and operated. I'm committed to raising money for it. I'm committed to helping get it established, but I think it has to be its own entity. It is not, obviously, when we talk about Freedmen's Bureau, we think about the original federal sort of chapters, so to speak, all over the country that were providing support for folks who had just been emancipated. This is not and cannot be that. But the language is very intentional, because it comes out of an understanding that freedmen deserve to be and should have been designated a protected class of citizens and need special consideration and advocacy. And certainly in a community that right now is more than half Black American, there should be such a place. It also kind of recognizes that the sort of services that you can potentially get from other institutions tend to not, they just don't put freedmen first. Even when it's a Black hospital, public hospital, but primarily run by Black folks, you're not getting the service you get in a different hospital. And so there's just if you don't do something that's consciously and intentionally talking about the need to center and prioritize a certain group of people, then they don't get prioritized. This is the myth of a rising votes. Not in America. Black folks always come last. And so what you have to do is create something that says this is exclusively for this group of people to avoid that happening. Beyond that, I think, a lot of the details, I have ideas. I find this a really interesting idea. We talked about Naeem earlier and Be the Power. I am so grateful. He has educated me so much on the meaning of freedmen, the history of it. He is definitely an inspiration when we talk about as we talk about the contours of this idea. Obviously, Marlon is a critical influencer in my thinking. Ultimately, I want to turn this idea over. And my role relative to it will be the local alderman who responds to the needs of this institution, and also a fundraiser. I will raise as much money for it as I can and turn that money over. And it's, the glib answer would be, it's not my business. And I'm not being glib, but I do think that's an important way to think about it. At some point, I have to recognize if I'm, authentically an ally and not just somebody who's, kind of overstepping everywhere, that there are going to be elements. And honestly, at some point, I'm sure we'll come in conflict. And I think that's good. I think you need leaders that don't agree and can work things out, and, pursue parallel agendas that sometimes clash.
Well, Gabe, I want to thank you for coming on to today's show. I could honestly just keep going on and on and on and on and ask you questions.
Thank you so much.
For days and hours. But, I want to allow people an opportunity to actually digest, the 1 hour and 17 minutes, that we've already discussed. I think that's very important for people to be able to do that. And then, maybe right before the election time, we're going to have you on again. Maybe me and Marlon can work something out.
I'd love it. That's wonderful. Yeah,
I
appreciate this conversation. Thank you so much.
Definitely. For those who want to donate to Gabe's campaign, if you like what he's saying, if it resonates with you, if you agree with it, I have left the link in the live chat where you can donate to Gabe's campaign. The link is also in the description box below. And if Marlon, if you're still in the background and you wanted to cam up just to say a few closing words, feel free to do so. You cammed up right away. And also too, like I said, there a lot of people had a lot of questions. Can't get to everything all in one sitting, but I will say this much: for as far as I've seen from Gabe, Gabe is definitely not ducking anybody. So tell people where they can find you out, how they can contact you, if they want to bring you onto their platform to ask you some questions. How can they reach out to you to maybe get clarification on certain things where they feel that they didn't get clarification on here, or maybe there are certain questions that they want answered that I didn't answer. How can they contact you? How can they reach you?
Thank you for asking that. We've done about a dozen hours of Clubhouse and Twitter Spaces. We've done about a half a dozen shows. You can reach me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. It's Gabe45, GABEFORFIVE on Facebook and Instagram. It's just at Gabriel Piemonte on Twitter. Our number I could put in the chat box, 773-717-2842. Email gabe5@gmail.com. And yes, we'll go on anything. I mean, Marlon and I have really tried to talk to as many people as possible and really kind of transparent. We're creating a model, not just trying to do a good job of running and hopefully persuade people to vote for us in this particular ward, but a model for how the federal reparations movement, we're need state represent everywhere. And our hope is that this is the way that happens. And obviously part of the what include folks that aren't freedmen, but who are and trustworthy allies. So we're trying to create a model of transparency so that if someone else says, I want to run, but they don't happen to be in a Black majority district, or, you know, they've got credentials that make them worth thinking about, that they'll go through something. We did 3 hours with Marcel Dixon, like almost at the very beginning of our process. We're happy to talk to anybody.
So now, Marlon, is there? Oh, can you say the phone number one more time so where
Yes.
people can reach you?
773-717-2842, and feel free to text at that number as well.
Okay, so I just wanted to make that very clear for everyone that's viewing and in the chat. Like I said, from what I've seen from Gabe, he's definitely not ducking anyone. So if you feel anything was missed here, by all means, contact Gabe and definitely contact Marlon. So Marlon, anything that you want to say in closing?
Once again, thank you once again. True to form, your show is incredibly professional. You know, sometimes I'm not the most professional, so I appreciate we appreciate that from you. But to your audience, if you guys, hopefully you can see what I see in Gabe. He's genuine. He's sincere. This is not, you know, just a passing fancy. This dude is for real. So if this type of advocacy is important to you, if reparations is important to you, if just justice for Black folks in general is important to you, recognize that this campaign is bigger than just Gabe. This is about American freedmen. This is about justice in America. And one thing I want to mention too, where Gabe's campaign office is on 71st Street, that's a very historical street in the city of Chicago and in the 5th Ward. And in the event he's elected, we want to make that Freedmen's Boulevard. We want to make that Freedmen's Boulevard as a way to, first of all, just document the history of freedmen in this country, from Robert Smalls to Dr. King to Naeem, BTP, the United Southern Daughters of Freedmen, NAASD out there in California. Just document the history of freedmen and the reparations movement all the way up and down 71st Street. We can have placards on each corner, kind of going through the history of how the modern day reparations movement specific to Black Americans or American freedmen progressed. And so that not only would it, you know, kind of tell that story, it would create jobs, because we're going to have to beautify 71st Street, if you will. And so freedmen would be working. The Freedmen's Bureau would create jobs. So that would be freedmen working. So not only would it do those two things, it would also mark our community, mark our territory. You know, gentrification is a thing in America, particularly in our communities. And this is a way to say this is a freedmen community. Whether gentrification happens or not, you know you're coming to a community that is a freedmen community. And so that marks our territory. It builds, I guess, ethnic pride, if you want to call it that. And so that's one of the things we want to do. So that's why this is one of the reasons I say this is historic. And also for a candidate to step out and risk talking about justice for Black people. A win says you're safe to do that. A win says if you're a white person, or unfortunately, even for Black aspiring electeds, a win says you can do that in a predominantly Black community. You can do this. But the only issue is the distribution of the message. You know, Gabe, when me and Gabe are together and we're talking to people in the community, it's like magic. I mean, it's like magic.
It
I'm
really
telling you, it is like magic, but it doesn't make a difference if I can't get to everybody. And that's where money comes in. You know, Black voters are not dumb voters, but they have to be able to get the message to them, just like any other voter. And so that in this space in the political world costs money. And so we're fighting institutional power. We're going to be fighting University of Chicago. Unions are donating to our candidate, our opponents. I think the largest war chest is of an opponent is like 150,000 or something like that. And I think the sitting alderman, what did she raise last time in the last race, Gabe? You recall? What, 300-something thousand?
She was running against a police reform candidate. She raised $250,000 in the runoff alone. That's before she even,
So that's what these races cost. You go spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we're a grassroots campaign. I think Gabe has said it before. He's a white guy, but he don't have a trust fund. And I'm a black dude from the south side of Chicago, so I ain't got no money either. So if you believe in this and you want to see this successful, go to the website, gabe45.com, GABEFORFIVE.com, and send us a donation. The election day is the 28th. And to get in the runoff, we're going to need money to distribute this campaign's message. So donate to the campaign. We appreciate the audience. Thank you for inviting us on. And
one more thing. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was just texted by Cynthia to say, don't forget about the open house. So tomorrow from 6 to 7:30 at the office, 1865 East 71st Street, we're having an open house. So folks who are watching, who are from the South Side, please come by, kick the tires. Let's have a conversation.
And that's a complete coincidence that the office address is 1865, y'all.
No.
I didn't even realize it till Gabe pointed out. He said, "Man, you know the office address is 1865." I said, "Dang, that's wow." Well, that's I don't know. That's something right there. So
it seems like a sign.
Yeah. I ain't all spooky, but that's interesting. That's interesting.
Well, I think that would be the Freedmen's Bureau, if I'm not mistaken. So we like this building as the Ward office and Freedmen's Bureau building because it's in the center of the South End. 71st Street is the longest street on the South End. And so I think, unless I'm mistaken, Marlon, I think that would be the address of the Bureau, how we've talked about it.
I like it. I love it. I love it.
Great. So, like I said, if you all want to get in contact with Gabe, I will leave once again for the final time, but it's also in the description. I guess you could say perpetually, right? It's in the description below, but Gabe's website, I just left it in the live chat. Gabe gave you all his phone number already. I guess give it one more time, Gabe, and then we can
absolutely
head out for the day. So what's the phone number that everyone can contact you at, and also your social media Twitter handles, and Marlon, you too as well after Gabe.
So the number is 773-717-2842, and then for Facebook and Instagram it's Gabe45. For Facebook, for Twitter it's Gabriel Piemonte, so it's just my name at Gabriel Piemonte. Gabe45.com is the website, so all those social media links are there as well, in addition to the YouTube one, which I think is just at Gabe45.
And Marlon, how can everyone contact you if they want to get in touch with you, to get in touch with Gabe, or just to speak to you about what's going on with the campaign?
Yeah. Well, if you get in touch with Gabe, you can definitely get in touch with me. But my Twitter handle is Do Right Grocery. That's DORITE Grocery. And my Facebook is just Marlon Watson. You should be able to find me if you just type in, search Marlon Watson Chicago. So you'll be able to find me.
All right. Well, that does it for today's show. I want to thank you all for joining me today, as well as Gabe and Marlon. And
thank you.
I will catch you all this Friday for Friday's live stream. And thank you guys for joining me today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.